what I'm here talking on tonight is something that is really near and dear to my heart, and that is emotions and the connection that that is, or that makes to our wellness program and to the choices that we make in life. So hopefully, we can be interactive and have some fun with our emotions tonight. So I'm just going to put this up there because these are two of my favorite sayings when it comes to emotions. Know thyself and discover the world. So know your own emotions and discover the world. And then emotions can launch a dream and emotions can destroy a dream. Do you believe that?
Building blocks and stumbling blocks.
Yep. So it truly is our emotions that launch everything in our life, and it is truly our emotions that halt everything in our life. And so when you hear Dr. Ellis speak, and maybe not so much tonight, although there's a few things that I'm going to point out in terms of the connectivity to what we're talking about, but our food choices and our choices in our wellness programs often go back to that. Those emotions are what stops us. So we know. We technically know, don't we? What we're supposed to do? Something stops us. So we're going to focus on a little bit of that tonight. Some of the research is actually quite interesting. So I'm the mother of 3 boys. My oldest is 26, my youngest is 18, soon to leave the nest. And, when I see this research, I have to admit it's a little bit scary for me because our world is changing. And so what this talks about is it used to be the basic 4, and I've given this presentation before, and people say, it's not 4, it was 6, it was 8, whatever. I'm not going to argue that. But the reality is when we think about our parents, it used to be, they're mad, they're sad, they had a bad day. But today, it's road rage. It's we need to be perfect. It's not love. We strive for perfection. We strive for perfection because we have social media. That's one of the things. And we look on there and we see relationships and we think, wow, my relationship's nothing like that person's. I have issues, right? It used to be worry. We worried, our parents worried, but now everybody has anxiety. And we see a lot of panic disorders. Is this ringing true to some of you? And so the fact is, there's a lot of research out there to say why did our emotions go from being happiness, anger, love, worry, to being bliss, rage, perfection, and anxiety? Why is that happening? And I think it begs a good question for all of us. We have to look at that. So we have newly exaggerated emotions. And, this is being seen a lot in children. And you can't, I'm not a big news watcher. I try not to watch the news. But the reality is, if we all do it, right? We all watch it. We all see it. And you can't help but notice a child goes in and he's shooting his schoolmates. Where does that come from? Where does that come from? And at what level does that exist in everybody? So what's happening and what some of the research shows is that those who practice, both in healthcare and in mental health is a big part of this, are seeing that more people are coming in with things like guilt, shame, saying they feel helpless. It's really sad. We've had this in our community, where a child in 6th grade feels so helpless they commit suicide. Okay, is everybody familiar with that's happened in this community? So we have guilt, shame, helplessness, anxiety, disappointment, confusion, and loneliness. And then you compare that to the common 4. So can you see how that's an issue in terms of emotions? So there's actually a few causes that there's many causes. I mean, I'm not going to touch on all the causes, but there are a couple causes, and I like to talk about causes that research shows that we can control, because I don't want to talk about things that I don't know how to control. I want to feel like I can do something, right? Don't you want to feel like you can do something? So as a parent and as an individual, there's some things that I feel like, you know what, I can control. And I love the research on this. So the first one is hyperstimulation. Does everybody get this? What is hyperstimulation? Well, it can be drinking too much coffee, but actually the research shows it's more the technology. So we're constantly on. So, you know, I'm just going to read you some of these. These are just some of the research articles. I'm not going to read you the research articles, but some of the titles. Like new disorders, stress response hyperstimulation, overstimulated nervous system. Hyperstimulation drives autistic behavior. Overstimulation may lead to depression. The Boston University tells us that tablets and smartphones may affect social and emotional development. How about that one? Yes. Technology, this is one of my favorites. Technology destroys empathy. What that means is that furthermore, technology diminishes or ruins, in fact, some scientists say it actually ruins our ability to read emotions. That was a study done at UCLA. So we are on cell phones. I'm just as guilty as everybody else. You know, we're on our cell phones. We are on our computers. We come home. We're on the television. There's constant noise. And so over the past probably decade, but more in the last 5 years, what they're seeing is a problem with overstimulation. Okay? So overstimulation basically impacts our emotions. So there's a direct correlation between overstimulation and our emotions. So now we understand why I feel a little bit mad at somebody, but my phone's going off, the TV's on, everything's blaring, I haven't turned off. Now I feel rage. I don't just feel mad, now I feel rage. Do you see that correlation? So now when I'm in rage, what are my choices? I'm more apt to make an unhealthy choice than I am a healthy choice. Make sense? Yeah, we act out. And especially when, you know, we're going to talk a little bit about emotional IQ and how you're, and I always thought this was so funny because I read one time that like your emotional intelligence doesn't really even start developing till you're like 26 years old. And I'm thinking, oh, that explains my 19-year-old. You know, like I thought he was an adult, but that explains it. That explains some stupid things I did back in the day. So we can control overstimulation, right? Do you agree? We can control overstimulation? We might not want to. Dr. Joe, you disagree?
Yeah, I think the world is stimulating so much, and with all the technical things and the iPhones and everything, it's nonstop, and then people are so used to, you know, responding.
Yes.
And then you have, you know, the Facebook crowd, and so they're faced with perfection all the time, and how many hits they get, and how many likes, and all that stuff. So I don't know. It seems like all the addictive behavior.
Yeah.
They have to keep them going because they're trying to strive.
Yeah. Well, there is certainly an addictive component to it. But I still believe we can control it. We may not want to as an individual. It's tough for me. We may not want to as a parent. Believe me, I know. You know, it's tough as a parent to say, turn the phone off. But the reality is it's still we still have control of it, over it.
We need to go out in nature is what we need to do. We need to get back in touch with the natural world.
Yes. So there's a second component that's coming out now in the research that I actually am very interested in, and it's dehydration. So right now they say that 50% of adults and children in the United States are walking around mildly dehydrated. How many of you today, and I'll include myself in this because I know I haven't, have had half your body weight in water? Tom Brady did anybody see the Tom Brady interview? He just came out and said, I don't know how old he is. He's like 40. He's in his 40s. He said, and they said, how can you compete at this high level? And he said, hydration. I always have half my body weight in water. And he went on to share some of it. And I was like, oh, that's pretty cool, because I'm going to be talking about that later this week. But the fact is that there is a direct correlation between dehydration and emotions. So I'm only going to get into a little bit of the research that's out there, but there's more, because dehydration also impacts sleep. And guess what? Sleep impacts emotions. So when you think about how that cycles and cycles and cycles, it's a pretty big impact. So just dehydration and emotions. These are just some of the studies out there, some of the headlines. And it, as we should suspect, it affects women more than men. Women report more headaches, mood changes when mildly dehydrated. The University of Connecticut did some research that said even mild dehydration can alter your mood. Even mild dehydration. Greater in females than males, but even men had fatigue, tension, and anxiety. Even men?
Even men.
For you 3 men in the room. Mild dehydration causes emotional problems. And then Harvard released a study. It said inadequate hydration can lead to impaired cognitive emotional function. And that more than half of us in the US do not drink enough water. And I can tell you I'm guilty, because I don't even like drinking water. I have to force myself to do it. And that's not even getting into all the impacts on aging and all that stuff that we know it does, which is just the benefit of being hydrated, So this is your emotions. So premature brain aging, they've seen issues with information processing, mental fatigue, and mood changes. Make sense? So when you look at it, we live in a world that's creating the perfect storm. So when you look at our poor emotional IQ, making poor emotional choices, you've got dehydration, hyperstimulation, the two that I focused on. We're going to talk about poor food quality, right? So you got poor food quality, and then you have overactivity. And overactivity just means we run from one activity to the other. And we see it in ourselves. Here we are, blessed to be involved in health by choice education and research. And we have amazing speakers running out to do another class. I'm not knocking that in any way, but we never stop. Yes. Workaholics. And we teach our kids, and I'm not going to say I'm not guilty. We taught our kids, you go to school, you go to sports, you come home, you do your homework, and, you do it all over the next day. And now they sit in their beds and, do whatever they're doing on their cell phones until they fall asleep. So we have created the perfect storm for poor emotional IQ. And so let's paint the picture. So the day includes overstimulation, technology, news. We didn't even talk about the news. And some people are addicted to it. Well, I'm not going to talk about it. But what I say is when you're going through this research, use it as a checklist. How many of these do you do in your life? And so another thing you can control is watching the news. Do you have to watch the news every single morning and evening? Lack of water we talked about, running from activity to activity, poor food quality. And so what happens in the evening, and we all do it whether we want to admit it or not, is we find some way to soothe. So the choice is, how are we going to soothe? And that's on the list, I think. So it is the perfect storm for bad decisions. Does that make sense?
If I may.
Absolutely,
I just wanted to
please.
make an observation. What's so interesting about this is that emotions are a direct effect, a direct result of hormonal imbalances. I mean, or balance or imbalance. And what we're talking about with the overstimulation and all of this is a complete imbalance of the hormones in the body, which is chemical reactors. And so we seek those foods that will be the quick fix for whatever hormone calms us down or creates that joy that we're not taking the space to create in our life, like the chocolate.
Absolutely. And I thought it was interesting because for those of you who were here on like early, Ella gave out some special tips, and one of them was this article, and it talks about a woman who was pregnant and she was craving, I think, pebbles, stones. And they've actually found that an emotional, it can be not just a lack of nutrition, it can be a lack of emotional imbalance that people will eat these crazy things like, you know, chalk and stones. And how many of you watch TLC and see the people who eat like the bed, the inside of the bed and stuff? It's crazy. But that's emotional imbalance at its finest. So very, very interesting to see that she handed that out today when we're talking about it. Diane.
I can tell you from a personal standpoint, it's been probably about 6 or 7 months ago. I was always getting up, turning on the news in the morning. I don't watch it at all anymore. I have no control over what the guy in North Korea is going to do. I know that if I'm a good person, when that day comes, I'll go wherever. I don't eat as unhealthy as I did. And I start my day out a whole lot better because I have no control over what's going on in the world. I don't. But I stopped watching the news, and it is amazing. I'm not missing a thing.
But you have control over your world.
I have control of my world, but I really feel a whole lot better, and I don't crave, whether you believe it or not, I don't crave sugar in the morning like I used to.
Well, there's direct correlation.
Yeah, it is.
Well, there is direct correlation. So, you know, what this leads to, and so what can we do about it? Because the reality is, I didn't paint a really beautiful picture. You know, when you just look at that, you're like, oh, great, now I'm depressed. I'm going to go home and eat some chocolate ice cream. Exactly. The reality is we can choose mindlessness versus mindfulness. And I always, in my mind, I don't know why I picture it this way, but I picture it as like the Richter scale. You know, and there's mindlessness and there's mindfulness, and I'm somewhere in the middle, and I'm constantly changing. You know, I'm constantly going back before mindlessness and mindfulness. And so we, like, sadly, mindfulness we have to work towards. We have to work towards it. But there are really simple steps that we can do. First of all, awareness. The fact that we can actually be aware that, okay, am I watching too much television? Am I on this phone too much? Am I, you know, just constantly running, being aware. Admitting, and then partnering. Partnering is a big thing. So when we spent 9 years, and Diane was one of the coaches, which is how we know each other, we spent 9 years in corporate wellness. And one of the things that we had employees do was journal. And the things we would read. But a lot of it, 90% of it was emotional stuff. But one of the things that worked was partnering. And partnering with somebody that you can say, hey, you know what? I want to make a change in my life. I trust you. I'm going to set some goals, and I'm going to talk to you about it. And I trust that you're not going to just say, oh, well, you didn't do it this week. That's no problem. I trust that you're going to say, Angie, you didn't do it this week. What the heck is your problem? It is a problem. Partnering can be a huge, we found that partnering, those people that had the best partners that held them accountable were the most successful in their long-term wellness programs. Those that were the least successful were the ones that said, oh, I'm just going to pick my spouse. Unless their spouse was like, you know, really going to hold them accountable, because they'd say, oh, my husband's my wellness partner. Unless they were really holding each other accountable, nothing ever happened. So I always said, it should be somebody you don't even really know that well, that you go up to and you say, I admire you because you've got some really great habits that I would like to emulate, and would you mind hanging out with me once a week for a half an hour to keep me on track for the next 6 months? Doesn't seem like that big of a deal, does it? Dr. Drew's like, yeah.
Pretty gutsy.
You have to show your vulnerabilities. That's pretty big.
But that could be emotionally cleansing, Dr. Joe.
Yes. And then signs, and more signs doesn't mean, signs, and more signs doesn't mean you're getting signs, although some of us do. It means basically putting up signs, and they work. We're going to get into that. And then having your toolkit filled. So we're going to talk a little bit about what is the toolkit, and what does it look like. So here's an example of the sign. This is a simple hydration activity, and I've had people say this actually works. So you put a sign like this on your fridge, and it says, are you sure you just aren't thirsty? So you've got it on both sides of your fridge, you're going to eat, and it's right there big, and it says, are you sure you just aren't thirsty? Why would you want a sign like that? Yeah. Because there is also research to say a lot of people eat when they're thirsty. A lot of people who in the medical community teach this, because because we're mildly dehydrated, we don't understand that we're thirsty. So we think we're hungry. And so we go and we eat instead of drinking water. And that's drinking water, not wine. So we open the, you know, it's okay. Are you thirsty? Drink 1 or 2 glasses of water, and you will be surprised at the difference that makes. 1 or 2 glasses of water, and you go, okay, now I can make myself a nice salad. I'm not going to just grab whatever's in the fridge and start eating it when I get home. I promise you that if you make these simple things the basis of the wellness program, and you keep coming back month after month, you will see changes. You will. You absolutely will. So here are some of the emotional questions. Go ahead, Holly.
I just add a little comment that Ella had taught me years ago that I know a lot of people say, well, I do not like to drink water because it just makes me go to the bathroom.
Mm-hmm.
Well, she taught me that you drink no more than 6 ounces for every 20 minutes, and then your body your body uses all that water, so you're not running to the. So when you say you're not just thirsty, do not drink like an 8-ounce glass of water because you're just gonna end up in the bathroom. But if you just drink 6 ounces at a time every 20 minutes, right, Steve? That's what Ellen always taught me.
Smaller amounts, yeah.
Yeah, 6 ounces. 6 ounces every 20 minutes, and you will not run to the bathroom, and you will be hydrated.
That's fantastic. That's a great tip. I mean, seriously. Because if you travel or whatever, and you think about that, if you drank 6 ounces of water every 20 minutes, how hydrated you would be.
And it's not that you have to do it every 20 minutes, but don't drink more than 6 ounces.
Right. Yeah, don't sit and chug,
Yeah.
24 ounces of
Yeah.
water before you get in your car.
Water and say, no, I'm hydrated. No, you're not, because your body's just going to eliminate it.
Yeah. You make a great point, because I know people who say, well, I work all day and then I come home at night and I drink, all this water, and then I'm getting up at night and my sleep is disturbed. Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing that's not happening then is what is happening is during the day they're mildly dehydrated and they're having the cognitive and the nervous system impacts of being mildly dehydrated, which is affecting their day and their emotions. So that's an excellent tip.
It
So-
affects you in other ways too.
I'm sorry.
It affects you in other ways too, because I was trying to do the half of my body weight in
Mhm.
water, because something I read, and I wasn't drinking it right, and it was eliminating it, but I wasn't getting to the restroom on time. I took one step out of my car when I got out for work, and I wet myself. I couldn't hold it. It just like that, it hit me. So it immediately eliminates
Yes.
when you have too much at once.
Especially for as we get older. Those of us as we get older. So very, very, very important to do it correctly too. So here's some questions, and this goes to the connection between now we know what can impact our emotions, right? But now how do we relate that to food and our food choices? And so the ones that are red are simply red because they are highly chosen. Like people say this is the reason a lot. So they eat mindlessly, not sitting down to dinner. I'm very guilty of that. My sons and I will stand around the kitchen counter and eat. Eat instead of hydrate, we talked about that. Feeling powerless or out of control around food. People will say they just feel like they don't have any control with it. But these are all the good questions, and these are in your binder. So when you go home, you can sit and kind of circle the ones that relate to you. But the reason that these questions are important is that, like, if you're eating when you're not hungry, or even when you're full, you're not eating because you need to. You're eating to soothe some type of emotion more than likely. And so by being able to circle that, by being able to go to a partner and say, I just really analyzed myself and I eat when I'm full, so I need to find out why I do this. That is the reason you ask themselves those questions. Does that make sense? Okay. So you'll ask yourself those questions. And then we're not going to go through all of these, but this has been really interesting. And Diane started getting into this. And this is like a whole class in and of itself. We're not going to have enough time for it. But the reality is that over time, a lot of the researchers have found out that certain emotions connect to certain types of foods. So, for example, when you're stressed, you might want fried, salty, sweet foods. When you're sad, you want comfort foods. That makes sense to me. That goes back to, that's age old. Why do you think they called it comfort foods? You were sad. I remember, and this is a sad memory, but my brother passed away when I was 21, and I remember, and my sisters and I all had weight problems growing up. And I remember this specifically because my sister had just lost a significant amount of weight remember Nutrisystem was big back in the day. And my brother died and everybody brought us comfort foods. And that's all we did was we ate for like months. And pretty soon my sister gained all her weight back and that was another emotional issue she had to deal with. But comfort foods are called comfort foods because of a reason. That's where that comes from. So when you're mad, that makes sense to me. When you're angry, you're crunching. Get it? You're like, they find that people will grab chips and eat a whole bag of chips. They're pissed off at someone. This person who worked today, and pretty soon they ate the whole entire bag of chips. Well, they told their husband about the problem. And spouse never said, well, you also just ate a whole bag of chips while you were telling me about that. Let's go out and go for a walk instead. Right? How many of us do that? And then what's interesting is I love the ones where you're like tired, exhausted, helpless. You'll eat whatever is available. So you're tired, you just don't even really care. Whatever, I need to eat.
That's why it's important not to keep junk in the house.
Yes.
Because it takes more effort to go to the store to buy the junk
That's true. It's a very good point. And then I like the anxious, confused, and guilt, because the reason I think that's really important, especially those of you who are parents and grandparents, is that anxious is a huge problem today. I am going to tell you that I know right now half a dozen kids in high school that are on anxiety meds, just in my circle of friends, their children, in high school and college. Anxiety and anxiousness is a huge issue in our youth. And I'm not talking little, I'm talking kids that are starting to go to college and enter the workforce. It is a huge issue. So when you think about anxious, confused, and guilt, what they turn to are habit foods. Things like sugar, which is highly addictive, and alcohol. And in this area, we have a lot worse problems. We have a major drug problem in this area. So this is an issue. And so what they have found is in the should-do column are activities that correlate to those things that if we can stop ourselves, we go to the fridge, we say, and I think of it like a routine. You go to the fridge and it says, "Are you really thirsty?" And you go, "Yeah, probably." And you drink 2 glasses of water. And then you stand there and you say, "God, I'm really pissed off. Let me pull up my list. Oh, okay, I'm going out for a walk. And then when I come back, I can go, okay, now I can cook a decent dinner." And if we can get in the habit of doing that, it works. Make sense? And this is something we should be teaching everybody. And it is the basis of any wellness program. Because I can sit here and you can teach me about organic foods and picking whatever. And until I address this issue, it's not really going to make that big of an impact. Do you understand what I'm saying? It's not going to make that big of an impact. So this is really what we found in our research and what we found in 9 years of doing this. It's identifying the mood I'm feeling, what I wanted to eat, finding your replacement choice. And your replacement choice isn't going to be the same as my replacement choice, right? It's not. And then how you felt after. So I did my replacement choice, and being honest with yourself. Because if you did your replacement choice, and I think one of the best stories of this is one of my dear friends, Betty, she was like having a lot of issues and emotions, and I invited her as her replacement choice to come to Zumba with me. And we're doing Zumba, and I'm rocking it out, and I'm having a blast, and she looks at me, and her face is like, and she leaves, and I said, "Didn't you have fun?" She goes, "I hated that." And I was like, okay, your replacement choice is not my replacement choice. She had to find her thing. We're all so different, you know? But at least it was getting her to go and do, and then now she's found her thing, you know? But it was that start of getting out the door, having someone say, "Come on, don't sit home," and, you know.
What does she do now?
Walk.
Walk.
Yeah. And that's easy for her, you know? But she doesn't. She's got a walking partner in her neighborhood, which is, you know, fantastic. So. Okay, so I only got 5 minutes here. So basically, this is in your binder too, so it doesn't really matter if we get through it or don't get through it. But what this is some of the foods that different practitioners, different research articles say help that are better choices. So if you identify with sad or depressed, so if you say, "Oh, I'm sad or depressed," these are some of the foods that will help you. And what's interesting about this is it kind of goes back to what's happening again in the chemistry that Jen started to allude to. Because some of the reasons that you're feeling this way is now your body chemistry is all off. So it gets back to the issue of when you're angry, your serotonin may be low. When you're depressed, your serotonin may be low. It gets back to, you know, what's going on in your body with magnesium and omega-3. So for example, if you look at sad or depressed, it says eggs with yolk has vitamin B in it. They are starting to correlate low vitamin B with being sad or depressed. They're starting to correlate low magnesium with being sad or depressed. Nuts and seeds are high in magnesium. You know, cold water fish is omega-3, and they're starting to correlate that omega-3. You can't, that's all over the TV, that if you're sad or depressed, omega-3 is something to be looking at. And then grains, quinoa, millet, teff, and these are all things that have the amino acid L-theanine, I think it's pronounced. So you can kind of categorize yourself. If I'm a person that's really angry, what is going on? If I'm a person that's really depressed, what is going on? And try some of these things. Now this doesn't address, and this is why we have, you know, the Dr. Ellas of the world, is that when you go out and get this, you want to get the right kind, you want to get the quality kind of food, right? But this just addresses the categories of food that can be impacted. So, you know, I think this is funny because I have seen, one of the things that we have seen, and I have seen in terms of the 9 years I spent dealing with in corporate wellness, and it was hundreds of people keeping journals, is that when people are really blue, a lot of times these people are eating pastas and like white breads, and they're not eating protein. There's a certain amount of people that think protein, that you can't coach them into eating protein. And, you know, you see it even in vegetarians, and I'm all for vegetarians. I'm actually trying to go more that route myself. So, but the reality is you have to do it the right way, because protein is important. It helps stimulate the production of the brain chemicals, okay? So if we don't have the stimulation of the brain chemicals, what's gonna happen? So now we don't have now we're like, oh, I don't understand. I'm becoming a vegetarian and I don't know why I feel depressed. You have to do it the right way, because you live in an overstimulated world. And you may have needed to do it the right way 20 years ago, but you really need to do it the right way today. Because more than ever, you have to combat higher rates of overstimulation. So there are ways to get things that we think of tryptophan, we think of Thanksgiving dinner. That's when I first learned about it, right? That's why you sleep. That's what I was told anyhow. That's why you want to sleep after Thanksgiving dinner. But you can find it in other ways. So this is all in your notebook. So, you know, this is the idea. I love this. I love when, like, what I considered like an old wives' tale makes sense. Like trail mix was to energize yourself when you were like on a long hike. And basically it came from, when it comes to energizing foods, this is the way to go. So if you're always feeling tired, having that healthy trail mix might be something that you want to consider. Thank you so much. It's been wonderful being with you. Have a great night.